In fact, listen to an ad we found from 1850 with an illustration of an Egyptian-style coffin. It advertises Fisk's metallic burial cases, and it says the cases, airtight and indestructible for protecting and preserving the dead, made of iron, are just what has been wanted for preserving the dead from decay and from the ravages of the dissecting knife. What's that mention of the dissecting knife all about?
Fears of grave robbing, or even fears of someone coming to take the body and bring it to a medical school for it to be
Did that
dissected.
really happen, or was that sort of an urban legend of its time?
No, these things happened, and again, this is even before the Civil War, middle of the 19th century, when when really the medical establishment as we know it today really didn't exist. So medical schools, which so desperately needed bodies to train and educate medical students, didn't have the access that people have today.
The local Atlanta newspapers were reporting around 1878 that grave robbings had occurred at Oakland Cemetery, and there were stories of the night watchmen being offered bribes by students for the remains. Typically, they would prey on the indigent and African Americans, and this is particularly the case in Potter's Field. They would only remove about a third towards the head of the grave, break open the wooden coffin or casket, and then just drag the body out.
Oh, so they didn't have to deal with the casket itself.
That's correct.
Oh. So in Egypt, were cemeteries separate like they are in an American cemetery, or was this mixed in with their living buildings?
No, usually the cemetery was set apart. Often, actually, it was on the other side of the Nile, usually on the western side, which is where the Sahara is. And in fact, a euphemism for dying was going to the west. So people would specifically go out there to visit the dead.
When we were talking about all the stuff coming from Napoleon and Americans really getting interested in this new ideas of the afterlife, does this coincide with what we think of as a spiritualism movement? Are we in the right time period?
Well, if we're talking about the late 19th century, we're definitely in the right time period. And at this point, you have a kind of craze in what's called spiritualism, which is a whole movement, great popular interest around seances and finding ways to communicate with the dead. This is after the Civil War, which is one of the deadliest, obviously, in U.S. history. But there was a great deal of interest in trying to find alternative means to communicate with the dead beyond the authority of the church. Another piece of this, too, is in the evolution of the funeral industry, where you really begin to see in their advertisements they will incorporate different kinds of Egyptian themes, playing on these themes of preservation, life after death, that are alternative to the Christian images and motifs, but being used in a sense for the business of death.
Well, that is very American, isn't it, too?
That's exactly right. And we tend to think, the death industry shouldn't at all fall prey to commercial capitalist interests, but it is a whole story of commercialism and capitalism.
Even today, there's some place, I think, in California where you can be frozen in a bronze Egyptianized sarcophagus. So.
Sure, I'm sure that they get a lot of people interested in that.
So not only are you saved on this earth, but you're guaranteed sort of resurrection in the next in case it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Cover all bases, which is a very Egyptian thing to do.
That's right. And American.
Yes.
Yeah.
That theme really is important in thinking about the ways in which the funeral industry begins to incorporate Egyptian themes. They really explicitly talk about a funeral for a king. I mean, they play off of that and the notion of the pyramid and the kind of monumentality of it all that I think resonated with American sensibilities.
Did it have to do with American democracy as well? That, you don't have to be a king to be buried like a king. Do you see that at Oakland?
Absolutely. There is a great deal of conspicuous consumption, consumerism.
Well, I was going to say what you just described could have been taken verbatim out of an advertisement in a funeral magazine in the early 20th century. I mean, they were playing off of these themes of democratization.
Really?
Having a funeral that's fit for the king, but that anyone can afford. And even embalming, is used in terms of the mythology that is emerging in the funeral industry in the early 20th century, is seen as something that was in ancient Egypt exclusively for the royalty, but in 20th century America is available to people from every class.
So it's ancient Egypt, only better.
Exactly. That's like part of the American way, and ingenuity is, borrowing from other cultures, but making it better and making it more profitable.
Of course. So Peter, as an Egyptologist, when you see all these borrowed and maybe watered down Egyptian motifs all over the place, how do you feel about it? Do you think that it's a sort of a tip of the cap and a nod to ancient Egypt, or do you think, oh, well, they've just got it all wrong?
No, I think they're always with us. Our roots are in Egyptian civilization. Even Christianity, the whole idea of the ultimate resurrection of the body really comes from ancient Egypt, from Christianity's roots in ancient Egypt. It's certainly not part of Judaic tradition. So there's so much about ancient Egypt that really resonates with us today. So
it's
it feels
okay.
very comfortable.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We had a great time with the dead today.